what I'm going to argue that we are indeed witnessing the political transformation of Canada. You must admit that the Canada of today is governed by different values, frames, and ideas than it was as recently as the 1980s. So I'm going to tell you why and how I think this happened. My book, Harperism, discusses in equal measure what Stephen Harper has done as Prime Minister, and also the ideas that underlie and frame his actions. If you understand those ideas, then what he does makes more sense. Many people have asked me what they need to do to get rid of Harper. My response is, well, you may get rid of him, and that will certainly ease the pain, but the ideas will still be there to guide and constrain whoever follows him. So yes, discuss how to remove Harper from office, but don't forget to have the more important discussion of how to change the ideas that today rule politics. That politics is governed by ideas was most lucidly expressed by British economist John Maynard Keynes in his 1935 classic, The General Theory of Employment, Interest, and Money. And this is what he wrote. The ideas of economists and political philosophers, both when they are right and when they are wrong, are more powerful than is commonly understood. Indeed, the world is ruled by little else. Practical men who believe themselves to be quite exempt from any intellectual influence are usually the slaves of some defunct economist. Madmen in authority who hear voices in the air are distilling their frenzy from some academic scribbler of a few years back. And then he concludes with this: I am sure that the power of vested interests is vastly exaggerated compared with the gradual encroachment of ideas. So when some on the left make the claim that Harper is in thrall to the oil and gas industry, for example, what Keynes would call the power of vested interests, I disagree. Instead, I see Harper following the ideas of several defunct economists, in particular Austrian economist Friedrich Hayek, who was Keynes' great rival, but agreed with him on the importance of ideas in governing society. In fact, Hayek made it one of his great missions in life to challenge Keynes and promote ideas developed by himself and his classical liberal colleagues he brought together in 1947 that today we call Neoliberalism. So it has a long history to it. The quest for a market state, a state governed by market transactions and not through our elected representatives. And I think that's a fundamental notion there. These ideas reached Canada's shores in the 1970s with the creation of the Fraser Institute. They were operationalized first here in British Columbia in 1983, after Bill Bennett's victory on what was called the New Reality. Federally, they appeared under Brian Mulroney the following year. So neoliberal ideas have been around for a long time when Stephen Harper finally took over the reins of government. He has simply been more effective and single-minded in their pursuit than his predecessors. Most of my book is taken up with Harper's neoliberal agenda and his focus on the economy. A second academic scribbler, to quote Keynes again, has also influenced political ideas, particularly in the United States and Canada. German Jewish philosopher Leo Strauss taught at the University of Chicago for several decades and built a large following in government and academia that is today known as neoconservatism. Simplified, This is the view that most people are too ill-informed to make good political decisions, and a ruling elite must make them instead. As the book explains, these folk have decided that the way to maintain a strong society is through traditional values, religion, and perpetual war. Sound familiar? Harper wants the election to be about the economy and security, which is just another way of saying his neoliberal and his neoconservative precedents. So I'll first talk about neoliberalism and how it came to be the dominant ideology. Then I'll mention the neoconservative aspect to the Harper era and end with a discussion of some of the political transformations that we are witnessing. First, what is neoliberalism? Well, there are thousands of books, articles, and blog posts written on the subject, but in my view, it can be reduced to a simple proposition that economic freedom is more fundamental than political freedom, or the market trumps democracy. Neoliberalism as an ideology and an economic philosophy differs sharply from the classical liberalism that stretched back to Adam Smith and the 18th century. That earlier liberalism maintained that government's role in the economy should be strictly limited. The new liberalism, in contrast, promotes a market state in which economic freedom, property rights, free trade, and individual liberty rule politics. Such a society cannot come about without concerted political effort and organization. The role of government in neoliberalism is to create and enforce markets and prop them up when they fail, as is what happened in 2007 and 8, after the financial meltdown. As geographer David Harvey has explained, if markets do not exist in areas such as land, water, education, healthcare, social security, or environmental pollution, then they must be created by state action if necessary. It's fair to say that neoliberals believe in government, but they have little faith in democracy. In fact, political freedom may not even be necessary. Their ideal state is Hong Kong, especially before it brought in a minimum wage and competition laws. And what this slide shows is on the left that one of the major efforts that I'm going to talk about in a few minutes, the Economic Freedom of the World Index, which countries rank the highest on economic freedom, which is unfettered by government regulation, by oversight, by trade union rights and things like that. Get rid of those and you have more economic freedom. So Hong Kong has always been first on their list, but the chart on the right is countries or jurisdictions with the greatest inequality, income inequality, and you can see that on the far right is Hong Kong. Okay, economic freedom and economic inequality seem to go together. So that's an important point to make, the importance of the economy over politics. I should note that liberalism, as we commonly use it in North America, is the opposite of the classical liberalism that I was talking about earlier that is still used in Europe. To understand how neoliberalism became the dominant ideology, we need to go back to the end of the Second World War. The war itself was a time of intense government planning and massive industrial effort directed by government. Before the war, Franklin Delano Roosevelt's New Deal made government an essential player in the economy. And after the war came an era of great social progress throughout the developed Western world. Social democracy and the welfare state were the order of the day, driven by values of social justice and collective action. It was also a time when the Keynesian orthodoxy dominated the intellectual landscape. Developing his theory during the Depression, Keynes observed that direct government intervention is required to achieve full employment and assure a sufficient level of demand in the economy. In the world under Keynes, the state held a central role in nation building, modifying the excesses of capitalism and generating some measure of equality of opportunity. Such a vision was the opposite of economic freedom. How could there be such freedom if government was prodding the economy in what it considered to be the right direction? Following the Keynes approach, Wood, Hayek argued in his classic manifesto, The Road to Serfdom, it would lead to a nightmare world of collectivism and socialism, to slavery, not freedom. Shortly after the war, Hayek invited leading European and American intellectuals of various free market persuasions, including rising star Milton Friedman, who you can see in the middle there, to meet in Mont, Pelerin, a Swiss lakeside spa. He charged them to develop theories and strategies to counter the Keynesian orthodoxy and take down central planning as a fundamental activity of government. At that time, Hayek and his free market colleagues were a beleaguered minority, outgunned by Keynesian socialists and Marxists. During their 10 days of talks, they agreed to form the Mont Pelerin Society with a mandate to work towards a market state. It worked better than they could have imagined. 60 years later, social democracy is a fading memory. As Marxist scholar Perry Anderson ruefully observed, whatever limitations persist in its practice, neoliberalism as a set of principles rules undivided across the globe, the most successful ideology in world history. So here's how the neoliberalism that started out just as a set of discussions in 1947 became the dominant ideology of today. And perhaps you might think that's too strong a statement, fair enough, but recognize that it does have, almost all governments in the world have to pay attention to neoliberal ideas.